Well, hello, my friend. We haven't chatted for a couple of weeks, right? Because that's life. Illness, things happen, don't feel well. That's life, isn't it?
Absolutely,
And here
absolutely.
we
But it's
are.
always lovely to be here with you and to see you. So I'm glad we get to do this week.
Well, me too. And, it's right in between other things. It's hilarious because we had a flood in the basement and now we're going to play volleyball and we've got this. And, it's like, oh, where am I supposed to be? What day is it? And where should I be right now? And I always look forward to this because it's always so grounding for me. I have to tell you, this heart to heart connection, because these beautiful, real conversations are a lovely reminder of what is important on this journey we call life,
Yes,
right?
yes,
All
exactly.
of the things that
Exactly
pull
right.
you away, like it's like you can acknowledge and allow it's not great to have a cold. You can acknowledge and allow it's not great to have a flood. They're just life experiences and they will move on. And so it's just, for me, this is always that, like, sort of reconnecting to the important topics, which is why I want to talk about you, like the healthy, your beautiful movement, Healthy Mourning Revolution, mourning with a U, right? And again, now, and I have to tell you, in every presentation, no matter when I'm speaking, your name is mentioned. Converting grief to mourning, forgotten grievers, buried and carried grief. These are all subjects or things that are not, mainstream. Like, I want everyone to be familiar with these concepts. And so that is where you come in, and you had a live launch recently. So, like, just tell people, or tell me, like, remind me what you do on the live launch and some of the great, because I know we're all students and we're all teachers. You learn every time. What,
Every single time.
right? So what transpired this time that's memorable? Tell us all the
Oh,
juicy
yeah,
stuff.
that's a great question. That's a great question. So here's the thing. I think we all need these touchstones. So I'm so grateful that you and I get to have this touchstone with each other and that we get to make this public. This is a wonderful thing.
Mhm.
And when we're grieving, it's all the more important to have touchstones, because the reality is the stuff of life that comes up when we're grieving, it feels overwhelming
Mm.
because we don't have as much capacity to handle what's coming down the pike. So we need to know who are the people that we can reach out to. We need to know how can we check in with ourselves, because life happens and it's really easy when we're in the grief journey for life to either go right over us or for life to kind of take us out. But if we
Mhm.
have that touchstone, and if we have a way of converting our grief to mourning, so that we have a way to listen to our grief, to hear what it needs from us, and we prioritize it, even if it's just once a week, we're going to check in, which is what the
Mhm.
HMR program is all about, right?
Mhm.
But the point is that we have a way to touch in and tap in. So the live launch is basically an introduction to this way of thinking about things.
Right.
So the live launch, we start with day one. What is the difference between grief and mourning, as you said, with a U, Mourning?
Yes.
Because most people use those terms interchangeably, right?
And
Grief
we
and
don't really
mourning.
know what either of them really means, right? It's like,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, we don't define it. We just throw
no.
it around. Hmm.
But in the simplest terms, grief is the internal response to loss. It's what's going on the inside. So even if we can't see what somebody's going through, they're still grieving because they are having an internal reaction to the loss.
Mm.
Even if the internal reaction is kind of a numbing or a freezing, they're still having a grief response.
Yes.
And we're so quick to say, oh, they're not grieving there, right?
Oh,
And
they're not grieving properly.
yeah. Well,
Not
that's a
grieving
myth of
right.
grief, right? That there's a myth of grief that there is one and only way to grieve. So,
Yes.
so day one is about saying, okay, so if grief is the internal experience of loss, mourning then is the external expression. So when I'm crying, I'm actually mourning.
Mm.
And we need to make healthy pathways for people to express their grief through mourning. So when we talk about converting grief to mourning, what we're saying is that internal experience gets moved out into an external experience and released and relieved from the body.
Mm.
otherwise the body is holding it, and the body is holding all of these symptoms of grief. And it's hard and heavy to hold all of this. So we can bury and carry our grief. If we don't convert it to mourning, we're going to bury and carry it. And let's face it, in North America, in both the US and Canada, we are societies of buried and carried grief. It's what we're
Because that's
taught
what
to do.
people want
It's
people to
expected.
do.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it's what's
Right.
expected.
Just
Yeah. When are you
hold
going
it in,
to work? Yep.
stay strong. Oh,
Yep.
good, he's holding it all together. That's and that's brave. Whereas wouldn't it be wonderful to say, oh, thank goodness he's converting his grief to mourning, and they're right expressing it and letting it out.
Yeah. And the perception that strength is, I'm okay, I'm not crying.
Oh,
Perception
it's
that
courageous to cry.
Yeah, the perception that tears of grief are a weakness, that's a myth. So day 2 of live launch is all about the myths of grief. And I go through
Beautiful.
about 7 different myths, because if we buy into the myth, if we believe that our tears are a sign of weakness, then we're not going to be weak. It's certainly, we're vulnerable when we're mourning.
Oh,
So careful who we mourn around. That's absolutely true. And tears of grief are a sign of strength. So as we liberate ourselves from these 7 myths, suddenly it's, oh, thank God. Now we find some freedom, and now we find permission to connect with our grief and to actually trust and listen to our grief. So in the live launch, we also have homework assignments, right? Each day, to help us to learn how to listen to the truth of grief as opposed to the misinformation we've been given.
oh my
So
goodness. I love
day
it.
1, definitions that really give us the foundational. Day 2 becomes the mythology. Day 3 is, okay, so you need to be careful who you grieve in front of and who you mourn in front of.
Yeah.
What makes up your wellness team? How do you vet your wellness team? How do you deal with the fact that you thought this person would be part of your wellness team, but they're not showing up for you? You know, my heartbreak. When I heard a client talk to me about her best friend who she thought she'd be able to lean on when her husband died, and instead that person just hid and disappeared, which, when we have buried and carried grief, of course we're going to hide, because your grief
Terrified.
is me, right? Yeah, it's going to bring it up. So we talk about that. We talk about having grace in that. We talk about how do you vet your wellness team. That's all day 3. Day 4 is a straight up Q&A, and that's where my lessons come from. When I hear what the new questions are that I've never had to answer before,
Right.
or I'm getting a repeat question, but I'm answering it in a different way because of the way I've walked with clients in the last several months since the last live launch. Those are always really interesting. And then day 5 is kind of wrapping it up, but putting it in a context of, okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to hear and listen to, what is our grief telling us about moving forward? What is the next steps in the grief journey? How do we actually navigate our grief journey? Which comes back to this idea of touchstone, because, you know, the HMR program, my book is 52 ways. So I didn't realize this until after I wrote the book. I don't know if I've ever told you this, but I wrote the book, and literally I got the hard copy of the book, right? And I'm looking at it,
I love it so much.
and I went, 52 ways. There are 52 weeks in a year.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, how did that happen? Well, you know, divinely guided.
Of course. Yes.
Yeah. So literally, November of 2019 is when the book came out. January of 2020, when people wanted to know what can we do with the book, I thought, well, you know what? Let's get together once a week and let's just explore a conversion technique every week. And what that became is what is now the HMR program. It evolved over COVID, over the 3 years. And it became a curated. So the first year we just went 1 through 52. And by the end of the first year, I discovered, you know, I probably curated in a different way. 1 month, we're going to look at the emotional symptoms of grief. Yeah. 1 month, we're going to look at the mental symptoms of grief and what are the conversion techniques that speak specifically to that. So now we go month by month, right? But what that does is that gives everybody that once a week touchstone. We're going to connect. We're going to talk about one conversion technique. So you're not overwhelmed by the book. You're not overwhelmed by all that. You say, okay, for this week, I'm going to concentrate on this, and I'm going to begin to hear where the relationship with my loved one is through the conversion technique. Because what we don't talk about is that what the grief journey really is I talk about it as a journey from love to love with love. So grief
I
is
love
this
that.
internal experience, right?
Mhm.
But we're moving from a time when our love was physical and I could call my mother on the phone, I could have a hug, I could kiss my loved one just before bed, right? I had that physical experience of love.
Mhm.
Now we're moving to a relationship of love that I don't even know what it looks like. I can't even imagine what it looks like. But the only way we're going to discover where the relationship is now is if we do this grief journey with love and compassion for ourselves and
Mm.
for others who are going through it.
Oh, there's just so much beauty and wonderfulness in everything you are saying. And as you're speaking, all I can think about is, imagine if we normalize this conversation at home, at school, in the workplace, in our communities, throughout our lives, so that we truly, oh, right, this I'm grieving. And what's wrong with me? Why am I crying? Why am I not crying? Why am I angry? Why am I foggy? Oh, because this is how I'm grieving,
Yeah, yeah,
grief. I will say is like a toddler having a tantrum. You're going to tell that toddler how to have their tantrum, or like you can't, it's not to be controlled,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And if we just understood that grief, and then whew, okay, and found, connected with healthy ways to mourn, to express. And it's funny because I've often said that we are a grief phobic, death phobic society. Truly, our greatest, we're a mourning phobic society, because when we see
Yeah,
someone crying, we
yeah.
want to make them feel better. Well, guess what? I promise you, they will probably feel better as they're crying and expressing and have that very safe, non-judgmental place to cry, even though their loved one died 10 years ago, and we want them to be over it.
Yeah.
And
Well,
today they're crying, and we're creating that safe space to mourn.
for the person whose loved one died 10 years ago, any buried and carried grief from that can show up, right? So if we make an environment in which it's completely safe for it to show up, then it's not going to last 10 years. That's just the reality of it. And this notion that we're going to grieve for the rest of our lives, grief is a process that we go through. We were never meant to stay stuck in it. And the choice to stay in grief comes from, I want to love my loved one. I will honor my loved one for the rest of my life. And so I'm going to grieve their loss. And that's a misperception, because that's a misunderstanding of the grief journey.
Oh
When
my
you
goodness,
understand that
yes.
the grief journey is about finding where the relationship is now, then I don't have to grieve in order to claim the relationship. The grief journey, the process, is going to get me to where the relationship is now. And I can enjoy my life in that space. There are two very different ways to think about grief, which
Ah,
is what I talk
yeah,
about the healthy mourning revolution. Because what we're
right.
doing, we're revolutionizing the way we think about
Revolutionizing
mourning.
it. So, okay, so let me just clarify in my head. So, I mean, when we say we don't get over grief, we get through it. It's not like you have a stop date for grief. However, we don't have to stay in this dark, ominous place for life to show how much we loved someone. Sure, there'll be times where we feel so sad again because they are not here physically. That doesn't mean that we can't allow the joy of living throughout our lives, correct? Like, yes, we
Right,
may have what
right.
I call grief attacks along the way, but it doesn't mean we have to be cloaked in darkness our whole lives.
Yeah. So maybe we can reframe that grief attack to grief burst.
Birth.
Um, the reason we say grief burst is because a song plays and suddenly I'm taken back to a moment in time when you were alive. And I'm remembering that moment. Now, here's the thing: if we've done the work of mourning, if we've really done the work of mourning, then there's no attack in it. This is a
Mm,
lovely moment of remembrance. This is a
mm.
lovely moment of connecting. And it can even be just, what was it, like a week ago, the song Quando, Quando, Quando came on the radio. And I just giggled out loud and I went, Dad, do you hear that? Like, I'm
Oh,
feeling you all around me right now. And I could hear him whistling. And it was such a joyful moment of reconnecting with my father, who died 13 years ago in 20,
Right.
right?
Right.
Now, if I had not gone through my grief process and found where the relationship is with him now,
Then it would
it
feel
would
like an
have
attack.
been, Dad, do you hear that? It would have been, and then it would have been an attack. It would have been from
Interesting.
out of the blue. I'm being thrown into a memory with my dad when my dad was alive, and it would have been a completely different experience. The grief journey is a sacred journey that gives us the relationship again in a way that no one can tell you what the relationship will be, and you can't intellectualize. This is what we try and do. We try and intellectualize the relationship. We look for signs. We get upset if we don't see signs. It instead, what happens is, when we relax into the true grief journey and we go through the mourning pieces, that's what gives us the relationship. So with my mother, I was driving one day and the tears were just coming because I had been an executive director of a hospice, and I was having a really hard day, and I really needed her advice and her insight. And I knew that I could not call her. So I was experiencing this, not having her in the physical realm where I could call her on the phone. And I was driving home in a mountainous area, and I was crying so hard I had to pull the car over and just let the tears flow. And out loud, I just said, I just want you here. I just need you here. And in that moment, it was the first time that I heard her voice since she died. It was over half a year after she died. And I heard her voice in her very strong Hungarian accent. I'm not going to try and recreate it because I couldn't if I wanted
Come
to.
on, I
Right?
want to hear the accent.
I can't do it. I've tried my whole life. I can't capture it. But what my mother said was, so I'm right here. Talk to me. So I'm right here.
Right.
I'm right here.
You're right
You
here.
don't need a phone anymore. Talk to me. And I was startled. Like, I was startled by, I felt her inside of me. I heard her voice so crystal clear, and it was words put together. So talk to me would not be my way of speaking to somebody.
Right.
It was her way of speaking to somebody, which is what helped me to know this was her.
I love it.
It was my first step to really finding where our relationship is now, so that I don't need the phone anymore.
And she's right here. She's
Yeah.
right. She's right there.
Right. And from that moment on, every time I thought, I really just wish I could call you. And it's not that I never thought that again and never felt the pain of that again. I did. And it's like, oh, wait a minute, you're right here. So let me learn what that's like for me. And the process is a learning process. It's a discovery process that has pain in it and also has joy in it.
Oh my goodness. I just love this so much. And there's so many moments where we have grief and joy and mourning and it's like my children, as they're preparing for school, and my two beautiful children are both in love right now, and it's so gorgeous, and they know that they're going their separate ways. And I said to them, I said, yeah, this is going to be your heart. Like, you are going to, I know you're going to bawl your eyes out. I'm going to bawl my eyes out. We're all going to cry. And like, just allowing all of it, and knowing that it's like, some people are so afraid to love someone because they're going to die or they're going to leave or whatever. And I still, like, no matter what, even if someone leaves physically and they die or they move, still be connected. Right? You can still be connected, like, find your way to be connected. And again, because you cared so much, because you and your mom, there's so much love, there's so much connection. You don't have to, it's wonderful to find the dime. It's wonderful when I see daisies that remind me of my grandmama. It doesn't matter if I don't see them, we're still connected.
That's right.
That's right. Connected.
That's right. And that still connection shows up in different ways for different people. And so there's no way for one person to tell you where to look or what it is. You have to be willing to go to the pain place, because it's ironic that it's in the pain place that we discover, right? I had to be willing to shed those tears and to feel the pain of you're not at the other side of the phone in order for me to hear the next message. and where the relationship is now. So you said that we're not only grief phobic, we're mourning phobic. My way of talking about it is we're grief avoid. We avoid, and we have a masterful list of ways that we avoid our grief. We are mourning phobic. Absolutely. We are terrified to express what's going on the inside.
Absolutely.
And when we as a society can begin to normalize, which is why I'm all about compassionate grief communities. I'm just about compassionate communities, right?
Of course.
We make space for each other. And we allow each other to say, this is my experience right now, as opposed to judging it or trying to fix it. We're a society.
We have fixitis. We want to fix everything.
We do.
We want to fix everything.
I have fixitis. I want to fix myself. I want to fix the world.
Of course. Of course.
And when we start to love ourselves enough to say, hey, this is where I am right now, that's when the true shifts happen. That's when the true discoveries occur, right?
And it's beautiful when they do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And speaking of being compassionate, like, it's just so funny when I say this to people, they really get it. Say, how do we get good or better at anything? We practice, we learn, we feel like we did it wrong, then we do it differently next time, and then we repeat, and then we learn some more, and then we practice. And when it comes to grief, death, mourning, we avoid it, and then we wonder why we suffer excessively. Well, of course, and it's not our fault. We just have to do it. It's like, now what? Let's do it differently.
Yeah.
We have to learn this. We have to learn this.
Absolutely.
These are skills.
Absolutely, they're skills. And while you are the expert on your grief, you may not know the tools that you need to implement. And so for me, I call myself a grief coach, because I'm there to coach you in what is your journey, right? You asked me that we started this conversation with, what did you learn in the last live launch? And it's been, I'd say it's the last live launch, and since the last live launch, because the last launch kind of woke this word up in my ear, and I've been hearing this word everywhere. I'm struggling right now. People are struggling right now. And I had a friend recently who's her beloved four-legged dog, just her companion, died. And she said, I'm struggling, and I don't know why I'm struggling so much.
Yeah.
And then what we discovered is this beloved companion was her safety net through COVID, through everything that we've been through, right? This was my go-to, and my go-to isn't in physical form anymore.
Yeah.
How could you, my question is, how could you not be struggling right now? Right. And is the word struggling, or is the word grieving? We just don't recognize grief. And so
we want to say struggling because people are okay with you struggling also. If you're grieving, we don't know what to do. If you're struggling, I can say, oh, it's okay. And I think that's part of it, don't you? Like,
I do. And yet when it's, I'm struggling, then that calls forward the fix-its.
Oh, right.
Right. If I say I'm struggling, then it's like, oh, here, let me take this off of your plate. Let me do this. Let me do that. Right. As opposed to, you're right. I'm grieving is, I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to be with that. Particularly if I've got buried and carried grief, that's going to send me the opposite direction. Right. And so compassionate grief communities is, how can we learn collectively to honor our grief and recognize that when somebody says they're grieving, what they're telling you is they are in a sacred journey right now. And the only response to that is yes. Yes. Because if I say yes and I nod and I get really quiet with you, then I have just identified myself as part of your wellness team, as somebody who's willing to sit with you and let you be the lead of the conversation. I don't need to fix it. I don't need to change it. I just honor, yes, you're grieving right now.
And create that space. And at that moment, you don't need to tell them your whole story about when you were grieving. I'm begging you.
Yes, please
Oh
don't.
My gosh.
I can't take somebody else's story right now.
Right? That's what literally we want to relate, and I understand, and just create that space The silence will not kill you, I promise.
That's right. That's right.
Just create the space. And then if they ask you, have you ever been through something like this? And you can then, they're inviting you. And I've caught myself, right? And you want to, oh, I can relate to that. And then it's just like, no. However, we need to practice. And if you've done it differently in the past, or you cut someone off, or you didn't just show up, forgive
Oh,
yourself.
yeah.
And I always say you can ask for forgiveness and do it
Maya
next
Angelou,
time.
Maya Angelou, when we know better, we do better, period, done. When we know better,
Exactly.
we do better. Let yourself off the hook with that,
Let
because we've
yourself,
all done it wrong. We've all done it wrong. We're
oh,
encouraged to do it wrong in
well,
this
and you
system.
know what? I consider my superpowers are, I am committed to continuous learning, unlearning, and evolving. I am a teacher, and I am as much a student for life. I
Yes.
am okay to get it wrong, and I know that I will. And I'm okay to say, oh, oh. Well, that wasn't what I wanted. I wanted to be so zen and spiritual. And then this stuff came out of my mouth. And I thought, oh, and right. And my third superpower is I can be funny, and I can laugh at myself
Yes. Yes.
as I mess up.
Yes.
Right? Like, we're going to mess up, and we're going to be sloppy, and we're going to think that we're just in this great place, and then we forgot all of our wisdom. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. And we think I'm not going to even going to go there. I think that I
yes.
need to be perfect in order to be lovable, right? I was raised a bit with that.
Oh,
So that notion of perfection in alignment with lovable, instead of understanding what is truly loving, is to be patient, compassionate, and accepting of what's right in front of us. That right there, kind of lets the whole back relax a little bit. It brings a little breath to the human experience.
and that whole perfection thing, let's just throw that right out the window. We are flawed, imperfect, and fabulous.
Yeah. Well, for me, the way I know for myself I need to do that is I can't just throw it out the window, because it's the bedrock of everything I was raised on. So what I need to do is I just go, oh, there goes that little perfectionist again. God love her. I love her.
Wow.
Can we find a different way? I think it was Marianne Williamson who taught me you can use different languaging around it that is loving language, where you can say, oh sweetheart, I know you learned to do it that way. Can we
Right.
maybe find another way? And just using the word sweetheart when I'm seeing some imperfection softens it, because to just pitch it, because it's so foundational to my being and my
Interesting.
growing up,
Yes.
that's hard
Interesting.
for me.
Yes. Well, and isn't it interesting how we all have our buried and carried grief, and we were raised, right? Our parents didn't know what they didn't know, and they thought that that was the best way, etc. And, we all have our D for dysfunction in certain areas of whatever. And here's the thing, is that everything that we have been through, everything we've experienced, brought us to right to where we are today,
Yeah.
in this wonderful
Okay.
place of you and I connecting and being so called to have these conversations that people usually run away from, and to know that we've chosen to be a lighthouse, right? I think it was, I can't remember where the quote was from. Oh, Dr. Alan Wolfelt, I believe, when he's talking about the lighthouse is just a light. The lighthouse doesn't run up and down the beach trying to find all the ships, right? Like, we're learning, we're shining our light. We're saying, we've done it this way. I'm learning from I'm continuing to learn and evolve. Let's do this together.
Yeah.
And
Let's
that's the
do
greatest thing we can do, right? Teach by example of our, no matter what brought us here, what upbringing, what experience, we're here.
Yeah.
And we can support one another through the rest of our journeys.
And the recognition that it's really hard to go this alone. You
Oh,
know, the tendency is to isolate and to turn inward. And that's why the wellness team is such an important concept here, so that you do identify, because it's important to identify who's part of your wellness team, who's part of your neutral third, who's part of your not helpful third.
oh,
Uh,
yes.
it's really important that we vet who our wellness team is. And when we find the people that we can trust and that we can really walk this with, that we then feel like we can lean on them, that we ask their permission and then we lean on them, and we actually make the phone call when we need to. We actually call in the support when we need to. Because, you know, I'm a loner and I'm good to go it alone. And, you know, I'm strong, all of this stuff. It takes a lot for me to pick up the phone and call somebody and say, hey, even I'm struggling, or I'm having
Yeah,
a hard time, or I'm grieving, or I'm having a moment, whatever it is, right? So
absolutely.
finding the place where we can actually do that, and we can actually reach out for the support that we need in order to continue on our journey of
Mm,
unfoldment.
well,
Because the grief
yeah.
journey is a continuation. Life didn't stop, although it feels like life stopped with the death of our loved one. Our life continued, and the way that we walk our grief journey is part of our evolution. And so honoring that evolutionary step and getting the support that we need at this really crucial time, that's everything. That's everything.
It's everything. And it's oh, this is a whole other big topic. When we're so willing to give, right, to just show up for others, and we're reluctant to receive, right, because we celebrate, oh, they're so good, they're giving, giving, giving. However, I say to people, how do you feel when you just show up for someone else and you give? Oh, I feel great. Well, do you feel like if someone asks you, they want to lean on you, is it a burden? Oh, no, I don't mind. Well, why don't you allow them that opportunity as well, right? To that give and receive flow of beautiful energy exchange, and to give. It's a privilege for that person to see it as something. Wow, they've entrusted me with their story at this vulnerable time, and that's an honor. And so to trust, right, and to know that for those who don't know how to be a part of your wellness team, to just show up, it is about them and their buried and carried grief, and to allow them their process, and find those who are able, willing and able at this time,
That's right.
without
That's right.
taking it personally.
Yes, and
Easier
without
said than
taking it
done.
personally, and to the degree that we can, because when we're grieving, it's sometimes very hard to extend grace to somebody else, but to the degree that we can extend grace and recognize. I had a mentor once who said these words to me, and it's really been in my ears this past week. It is unkind to ask someone who's not capable of doing something to do it.
Mm.
It's unkind to expect somebody who's not capable of something to do something. So I don't want to extend an unkindness by creating an expectation for somebody to be there for me when they can't be.
Oh my gosh, that's so important. And for to create your wellness team before, and that's my whole thing, right? Being proactive and to have those conversations, and to also know that having your clear boundaries and allowing them their clear boundaries, what is okay for me in this moment, what is not okay for your wellness team as well. Perhaps you have a friend, a relative, a whoever, who is always there for you, and in your time of need, they're in a crisis.
Yes.
And so for both of you to have those conversations, that clear is kind, as Brene Brown says, and your boundaries need to be what is okay for you right now and what isn't. It's like, I am sorry, I wanted to be there for you, I am not able at this moment. And that
Yes.
has to be okay. So have more than one person on your wellness team.
Yes. Oh, and you must. You must. In
Village.
fact, what I advocate is 3 people for each symptom area. So we've got the 5 symptoms areas, right? Physical symptoms. Who are your wellness team in the physical symptoms of grief? Who are your wellness team in your mental symptoms of grief? Who are your wellness teams in your emotional symptoms of grief? Who are your wellness teams in your spiritual symptoms of grief? right? These are really important questions that we need to
Huge.
ask. So, and I say, and then, so you create a contact list and then you put it somewhere where you can see it really clearly. Because,
Beautiful.
for me, I know that I'm avoiding my grief if I'm suddenly feeling called to the potato chips. So what did I do when
Hello, come and eat me.
exactly. I know that I'm avoiding something. Actually, when my mom died, it was pudding. That's a whole nother story, right? But so what did I do? I took my wellness contact list and I put it on the cupboard. I taped it on the inside of the cupboard. So if I'm opening that cupboard to go make pudding, guess what I'm looking at? My wellness team. And now it's brought
Right.
up to a conscious choice place of, yes, you can make your pudding. You might also want to call a friend while you're cooking that pudding. It's not to not do it.
No,
It,
but
it,
to,
it
yeah.
is to bring gentleness and support to that moment,
Mm.
right?
Oh my gosh, I love this so much. And I know we can talk about this stuff forever, and we have to continue this because I think that, again, why would anyone understand these concepts, these conversations? We don't have them. We have to have them ongoing.
Yes.
And to lean into them, to
Yes.
to just start a conversation. And like everyone should go to your website, Healthy Mourning,
Yeah.
healthymorning.com.
Healthymorning.com.
Yes.
And in fact, if you
Oh,
go to that website, you can click on immediate support, or you can just click on basics of healthy mourning. So if
I
you
love
click
it.
on basics of healthy mourning, this is what I did. I taped every time I do a live launch, I tape it, but I taped the last live launch. And one of my surprises in the last live launch, and it happened while I was doing the launches, I actually discovered that this was going to be my last live launch. So
Ah,
now I'm creating a new 5-day program, but in the
yeah.
interim, I'm inviting people to actually go and do the basics of healthy mourning, and you get those 5 days, but you can do it
Beautiful.
over a 7-day time period at your leisure with the recordings. It's powerful. It's powerful. It's powerful. And it
Oh,
gives you the foundational pieces that you need. Because the question I'm most asked right now is, I've never had to deal with death this close before. What do I do? No,
what
nobody
do I
said,
do?
nobody knows what to do. What advice do you have? And I'm going to say, it's not that I have advice, but I do have some tools.
Yes.
Go look at the basics of healthy mourning so that you understand the foundational piece, and then book a discovery call with me so we can look at what the next steps might be.
And I'm so grateful for your generosity with these, right? With sharing this with people, because isn't it just it hurts my heart to hear the words, someone died, I don't know what to do. And it's something we're all going to experience
Yes.
more
Yes.
than once. And we wonder why we have mental, physical, emotional, spiritual health issues and crisis. Well, why wouldn't we? My goodness. We can do it differently. And that's what you're showing and guiding people. And I'm so grateful for you. We have to talk more about this next week. Can
We
we?
will do. We will do. Absolutely. I'm all in.
I'm excited. And now I'm going to go to Toronto and cheer for 2 days for volleyball, the last volleyball tournament. And I'm so excited. And I'm probably the last day I'm going to cheer and I'm going to cry. Speaking of, oh God, there's my mother mourning. Mom, can you just hold that in? Because it's like, I'm going to be so sad because then they're going to, it was an important part of our lives. It was a chapter that's closing. And even when things are good that, it's still closure and you still have to grieve. So I'm going to mourn all over the place. Don't you worry about that. Have a most wonderful week, my friend. Namaste. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge. And it's truly a beautiful thing.
Tons of love to you. Thank you so much, and safe journeys to Toronto.
Thank you very much. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.